The job of the leader is to create the environment that lets everyone else flourish with and contribute their gifts, really. And so how do you set that environment that allows people to do all of that?
This is the James Cancer-Free World podcast. I'm Steve Wartenberg, and my guest is Dr. Monica Bertagnolli, the recipient of the James's 27th annual Herbert and Maxine Block Memorial Lectureship Award for Distinguished Achievement in Cancer. And distinguished is the perfect word to describe Monica, who is an acclaimed surgical oncologist and cancer researcher. And she is the former director of the National Institutes of Health and the National Cancer Institute, and the incoming president of the National Academy of Medicine. Welcome to the podcast, and welcome here to the James.
Well, thank you. It's not my first time at the James. I am delighted to be back.
And from what I understand, you know a lot of people here.
I do. There are some fabulous people here. I've been working in cancer with groups that I've been affiliated with for, at least 30 years.
Wow.
It's great.
So let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
On a cattle ranch in Wyoming. I heard you talk about that a little. I'm just fascinated, a rural community and a ranch. So tell us a little bit about that and how that impacted and influenced you somehow to become a doctor and a cancer specialist and a leader.
Yeah, my grandparents were immigrants to this country from northern Italy. My grandfather started a life as believe it or not, the sheriff of one of the counties in Wyoming. And he also, at one point, became involved in a cattle ranch. And actually, for a good amount of time, my grandmother ran the cattle ranch. So we've got a history of strong women in our family, which I'm quite proud of. She ran the cattle ranch. And then actually my first terrible experience as a child with cancer, I loved her, knew her, and she was wonderful, and she got cancer and died when I was a young girl. And after she died, my father took over the cattle ranch, and that's where I was raised and grew up with my two brothers and sister.
What made you decide to go into medicine?
I always loved science. I was a nerd. I'm still a nerd. I think the inspiration was my uncle, who's a doctor. He trained in family medicine and was a frontier doctor. And what that means on the frontier is that you are a long way from a place like the James, a long way from a major medical center, and you have to deal with whatever comes up with the people in that community. And it can be anything from they need to have their appendix removed to there's been a terrible accident to they've, got the sniffles. And or there's a baby to be delivered. And that's what kind of doctor my uncle was. And I mean, what an incredible inspiration.
I can almost picture it from the old Western movies that the doctor, you deliver a baby one day, set a broken leg the next, and then maybe even have to help with a cow.
Yeah, there you go. And actually, it's wonderful because my uncle also raised he had his own sheep ranch. So he was also, as most are in the community, had some part of agriculture going on.
So to go through your medical career would be 2 or 3 podcasts, but you've been at the forefront of so much research in terms of doing it yourself, working with others, being in leadership positions where you can impact where money goes, what is prioritized. So kind of in your 30 or so years doing this, what have you seen change in research and improve compared to maybe like when your grandmother was diagnosed?
Oh, yeah.
There probably weren't many options.
So, I just have to state something straight out about, having a career and being able to do many things and be deeply involved in important research. That didn't happen just because of me. I have been so incredibly fortunate. I was able to get an amazing education as an engineer. Then I went to the University of Utah, where I went to medical school. Really a remarkable biomedical research community there. From there, I went to Harvard University, Brigham and Women's Hospital, Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. Again, an incredible environment for research and advancing care for cancer patients. And I guess, my real focus in oncology started when I got to Brigham and Women's in the Dana-Farber. And being able to apply some skills that I learned along the way in medical school, doing research in a research laboratory, start applying those skills to the question of how are we going to get, rid the world of cancer. So that's really how it all got started for me. And it's interesting. Young people ask me sometimes, they look at my career. Sometimes I look at my career. They, how did all that happen? And, young people look for advice. What should I do? How do I have a career like yours? And, the answer is pretty simple. You bring your own drive, your desire to make a difference and really do this. And then you find as many good partners and mentors and like-minded people as you can possibly find, because no one does this alone.
Wow.
And that's the way to do it, really.
In the 200 or so episodes of this podcast we've done, the things you just said, finding good mentors, finding good collaborators, and passion is what almost every doctor here, scientist here talks about. And
that's what works.
Wow.
That's what works. And so, I just want to say, I am, I hear people say, wow, you've had such a great career. I am so immensely grateful for all the things along the way that have let that happen for me. And, I'll just put a pitch in here for the James right away. This has been part of my career, very much so. This institution, the outstanding fundamental science that's been done here. My closest association with the James was with Dr. Clara Bloomfield and the wonderful work she did in leukemia and leukemia biology, but also the wonderful work she did as an international leader for women in science, for scientists who are not afraid to demand what science needs. Any of us who knew Clara know that that's what she was all about. And she was just an amazing role model as a leader in the field.
Did get to interview her, not for the podcast, but for something else. And if I remember correctly, she might have been the only woman in her medical school class.
I think so.
And she was the head of the James early, one of the first women. Did she pave the way for you and Kim Rathmel?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing that was wonderful about Clara is she was also paved the way as an example of someone who is not afraid to speak up.
I did notice that. She's a no-nonsense person.
No nonsense. And what was so wonderful about that is it wasn't about Clara. It was never about Clara. It was about the field. It was about the science. It was about what was going to make us better. And that's also a priceless attribute, So she was terrific. And by the way, I'm one of the few people, well, no, there are quite a few of us who argued with Clara, had fights with Clara. Can you imagine having a fight with Clara Burfleet?
She scared me a little, so
exactly.
I did not fight with her.
You know what? She was wonderful. There were times I was leading a big clinical trials group that, she was one of the people who were fundamental in all that came before I entered that role. And she would boss me around, no, you have to do it this way. And I would push back on her and say, I'm sorry, Clara, this group is about more than just leukemia and I have to worry about other people. And she was always as feisty as she could be. She was always so wise and so, just so wonderful to interact with when you did come head to head with her in saying, yeah, Monica, you're right. I'm going to support you, because we're going to do the right things together.
And she was able to develop here one of the nation's preeminent blood cancer research and treatment centers.
No, not nations, worlds.
Okay.
Clara gets more than that.
You got me worried when you said no at first, but good. I'm glad you corrected me.
She gets more than that. World.
And she and her husband were like the dynamic duo of cancer research.
Oh, and Albert was, he was inspirational in my field because one of his breakthrough research findings was the understanding that you could see these changes in DNA that were unusual, that were inherited in families, and that paved the way toward us really identifying one of the now very well recognized fundamental ways that cancers can form. His started with gastrointestinal cancers and endometrial cancers to be able to see this defect. It's called microsatellite instability. And when I was still in the basic laboratory, really trying to make that leap from things I could see in mice to things that really mattered in humans, it was Albert's observations and that particular type of cancer biology that I was studying and I was the most interested in.
Wow. So you have had a lot of history with people here at the James, and our new leader, Kim Rathmel, you also have an interesting history with. Tell us about your connection with her and your friendship.
Well, Kimran is well known throughout the entire cancer research community as just being, number one, an outstanding researcher. Her field in genitourinary cancers, her work in genitourinary cancers is, sits among the very, very best. She also has this, her lab and her work also has this wonderful tie to translation. And how does it matter to people, and how does it matter to therapy development for people, which is a really critical feature in someone who is then going to go on to lead an organization as broadly encompassing as the National Cancer Institute or the James.
And she succeeded you at the NCI.
She succeeded me at the NCI, and I will say that I was very sad to leave the NCI. So I got this call from President Biden. He says, Monica, I know you just landed at the NCI. You haven't been there long, but we need you to move to this other job that had a vacancy. And I, honest to God, originally said, no, I can't do that. This is so important to me. I just got here. We have so many things going on that are critical. Please don't. I don't want to move. And he said, no, he convinced me that that was the right thing for me to do. And it was what he needed me to do. And so then my second thought was, well, you better find somebody who really is perfect for this position, because I had already become so invested and cared so much. And I was thrilled when he picked Kimran, and thrilled when she agreed. Perfect successor.
So you were both part of the Moonshot program, and under President Biden, so give us a sense of, even going back further, like in the past decade or so, what have been the big advances that you've seen in cancer treatment and science that you had a role in by giving some of the early funding for clinical trials and research?
Boy, that is a big question. So okay, well, let's talk a little Moonshot here. Moonshot was started by President Obama. Then President Biden was the vice president.
Oh, that's right. And he was put in charge of it.
And he said, I am putting Joe Biden in charge of the Moonshot. And so, and it was a recognition on his part, which he's the second president, the first president, to be fair, who said cancer is a national priority. We have to cure cancer, was President Nixon.
I do remember that.
And Nixon said, we are going to make this a national priority. And not only that, we're going to make the National Cancer Institute director responsible to the president and appointed by the president, because that was such a priority. So that really, I think, first kicked off the whole nation's dedication to cancer as being a threat that we needed to overcome. So then the next president, I think, who really made it a part of his signature initiatives was President Obama with the Moonshot, saying again, wait a minute, we thought we'd be further than we are right now. We haven't, this is a tough problem, and we need to redouble our energies. So the Moonshot, he started the Moonshot. The first part of the Moonshot, led by Joe Biden, was getting the experts from the entire ecosystem of cancer knowledge and together to develop a plan. Then NCI started to execute that plan by finding the experts in the labs and the communities and the clinical trials that could act on what that new energy just developed with a lot of new funding. And then finally, when Joe Biden took over as the president, he reinvigorated that effort with a reimagining of the national cancer, of the moonshot. And so both Dr. Rathmel and I were parts of that with the Joe Biden now version 2.0 of how this moonshot really needed to move us forward. So what you really asked me though is what's it done? What have we produced?
Yeah.
That was the mission and the challenge. Now, what has the community done? The community has responded on all angles in an incredible way.
When you say community, do you mean the cancer community or even beyond that in people who support and are part of it?
I use the word community all the time about many different things. And to me, community means the set of people who have a mission and a focus on what they're trying to achieve. And for cancer, and Kimron and I, fortunately have been able to work together on what we call the National Cancer Plan. And the National Cancer Plan that the two of us have put out there is literally that everyone has a stake in eliminating cancer. It could be the President of the United States who sets the challenge. It could be the researcher at the bench in the lab making the new discovery. It could be the two friends sitting on a park bench on a weekend when one of them turns to the other and says, "My friend, have you had your mammogram yet?" All of those things. So by community, I mean everybody has a stake in this. And that was one of the most rewarding things that Kimron and I were able to do together, is to develop and then roll out this national cancer plan that gets everybody involved.
What are some of the things you helped initiate? Like, one of the things I know people here have talked about is improvements in immunotherapy, CAR T-cell therapy, proton radiation. What are some of the big things that are here now and that you see coming in the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, so you're kind of asking me like to pick my favorite child.
Yeah,
but
I'll pick so many things.
Right, and so I'll pick my favorite child. Okay. Anyway.
Yep. Ooh, this would be interesting.
One of the things that looking at a career like I've had, really been in many, many different parts of the puzzle that goes from lab to clinical trials to leadership. I've trying to focus on what my position today and what my position at the National Institutes of Health could do, which is over all of health, could do that would really move this forward. And my particular focus for now, since it's arriving at the National Institutes of Health, has been medicine that works for everybody.
I've heard you talk about this, that rural communities don't have the access, and they sometimes have higher cancer rates and higher death rates, and that's something here at the James they've been
absolutely focused
on.
I take a pretty broad view of this. Rural obviously is near and dear to my heart. I grew up 100 miles from the doctor's office, pretty much. So, I know what it's like when I broke my arm as a kid.
And it took a while to get to the doctor.
It was 100 miles to go in and go to the doctor. That I lived in that environment. That environment is still there. That environment hasn't changed. But it's not just rural health. There's unique challenges there. It's also the single mom in the middle of a big city who needs to go in for her chemotherapy appointment, and there's nobody to take care of her kids. Do you know what I mean? I mean, there's so many layers of the issue of what we need to do for people to make sure that people are really cared for and get the care they need. And because our environment in health in the United States is very fragmented, it's just the way it's been created, the way we do insurance coverage, the way we do our care, the way our society is structured around health. It's fragmented, and people fall through the cracks all the time, and whole communities even can fall through the cracks. So I've been very focused on how do we attack that problem, and how that's because that one I think is really critical. So that's number one. And then the second part of this that I think is an approach to tackling that problem, but that also helps us with everything else we need to go do forward, is I think we need a national commitment to a learning health environment. What do I mean by that?
Yeah.
There are wonderful, brilliant insights that your doctors here at the James make in clinic every single day. They make a decision for a patient that worked great. That patient might not be in a clinical trial. That patient might not be of a study. That doctor has knowledge and insight, and their patients have taught them the best way to care for them. How do we harness that for the whole world? How do we make the knowledge that happens in all of these segments of our wonderful institutions actually connect them and make that flow together so that the next clinician who sees a patient like that this person over here saw a good result for, we can connect those dots? Isn't that an interesting question? Because it's not the way we've ever thought about transmitting medical knowledge. We've thought about our medical knowledge more as we're a scientist. We're going to apply by these very, very, very dedicated scientific principles from here and there. We haven't thought about harnessing complexity.
This sounds like this is going to be one of the key jobs of the incoming president of the National Academy of Medicine.
Well, of course, I hope so.
I
hope they picked me for that job because what I'm planning to do and bring.
How do you do that?
Yeah, how do you do that? Well, so for 20 years we've been trying to do. The National Academy's been trying to do this for 20 years. Actually, I've been involved with it, and so have many people at the James for more than 20 years because the Cancer Research Group, of which Clara Bloomfeld was one of the major leaders. So was Mike Caligiuri when he was here. So haven't, many of the other people who are still here. That group, we're always concerned with how do we learn better and faster from the clinics. That's what clinical trials do. But we now have incredible new tools. We have artificial intelligence. And we have technology, information technology, digital technology that now today can link that clinician in that clinic in the James with the clinician in Rapid City, South Dakota, taking care of people from the Ogallala Sioux Pine Ridge Reservation, and can link it from people in Queens, New York. And we now those barriers don't need to be there anymore to learning. So a big part of our efforts right now are, how do we use these new tools properly, wisely, safely, and how can both you and me, when we need to get our care, how can we trust them? How can we know they really have our best interests in mind and are going to work for them? So that's our big issue now. So
that's your big issue and your big job.
That's the big job.
Wow.
And I am thrilled to be able to take this on because the community is really sees the wonderful thing is the community both sees the possibility behind this, but also understands how careful we have to be and how deliberate and careful and grounded in science we have to be in order to build the trust environment that will let this all work.
So it sounds like, in talking about leadership, which is something I'm always fascinated, in your new leadership role, you're going to try to do this. What have you learned about leadership that will help you bring people together and get this word out and create the system you've just talked about?
Yeah, so the job of the leader is to create the environment that lets everyone else flourish and contribute their gifts, really. And so how do you set that environment that allows people to do all of that? And there are so many things, so many layers that come under it. But at the end of the day, it's always, okay, what are we here to do? We keep everybody on task. We try not to let things get scattered, that we try not to let mission creep happen. We try, a leader tries to keep everyone focused on what are the critically important things we need to do. And the other thing a leader has to do is to make sure that the people who are we absolutely depend on, from the person who works on the supply chain to deliver us the goods and services we need, to the scientist with the brilliant idea, have to figure out how all of those are invested in the goal.
Wow.
You don't, magic doesn't happen if you're like, it's a job, I have to do this, I'm going to show up and I don't care. It has to be, I care about what we're doing, when it's a job like health and tackling cancer. So that's the other part of the leader. Leader has to, and people aren't invested because you tell them they have to be. They're invested because they understand how important it is, how what we're doing is really important and it really matters to them.
They share your vision.
Right. So that's the job of the leader. Why is this important? Why does it matter to you? And then how are we going to do this together?
I have a feeling you talked to Dr. Rathmel about this because
that's her.
Because she said many of the same things when I talked to her.
I did not talk to Dr. Rathmel about her. Really not.
No, about leadership, I mean.
No.
Wow, you both came up with pretty much the same thing.
She's got it in her bones. Nobody needed to coach Kim Rathmel on leadership, I'll tell you. That's why she's so great.
So you're here at the James for a couple days, and you're going to deliver the block lectureship. So within the cancer community, give me a sense of what the block lectureship has come to meant in its sort of national reputation, and maybe even a little bit about what you're going to talk about, although I have a feeling...
You've already heard it.
So I was just going to say, creating this national knowledge...
We call it the learning health system.
The learning health system is going to be the topic of your block
learning
lectureship.
Health system. Actually, I'm going to talk about not just the learning health system. To me, that sounds too sterile, right? We have to do, why do you care about the learning health system? The learning health system being able to deliver personalized medicine, the exact medicine that every individual needs, right, because it meets their needs. And the medicine, the care that we give to somebody who grew up where I did in rural Wyoming is going to be different than the care in delivery, and in some ways, maybe even in substance, depending on what the person needs, than it is to be somebody here at the James, for instance. So it really is about a learning health system, but what is that learning health system delivering? It's delivering the individualized care that people need. So that's what we're going to talk about. And now I've already forgotten where you wanted me to go. What was the next question here?
I think you answered both parts.
Did I answer them already?
Okay. But I have a third part.
Okay.
As part of the block. Oh, no,
the block.
Did forget. What is the national reputation of the block lectureship?
Oh, my God. It is so special. And this is why it is so special. Well, let me just say this personally. The opportunity to not only receive such an honor and be given such a platform, a podium here at the James by such a signature event that has such outreach, this podcast, the events last night with the community, and very clearly this being something that this whole community cares about deeply. So the opportunity to have that podium is tremendous. But beyond that, priceless. The opportunity to have a faculty member, young faculty member from the James, be my partner for 2 years.
Yeah, that's Sarah Myers.
That's Dr. Sarah Myers.
Yeah.
And she is now what a gift to me to have her as being my partner. And she is working with me on exactly what we talked about here, a learning health system for patients with breast cancer.
And she's also part of the James Bridge program, which is reaching out to younger patients with cancer, which is that same concept of reaching out with information and education. And
the project, I'm going to talk about it a little bit in my lecture today. And I'm going to describe the project that she is helping to champion. And that this project is building tools that then everybody can use. That's the other thing that I really love about it.
Technology tools?
It's infrastructure, a structure, a roadmap, a foundation that then can be scaled to almost any other learning question in health. So it's a way of this new way of looking at how we learn from the clinical care environment put that learning, how we learn at the same time that we're giving care at the same time, and as part of the learning process, you're also continually improving care. And so she is the leader of one of the pilots to implement that type of principle in a clinical setting. And then once you know how this works, then it can be scaled to reach all the questions we need to tackle. And the analogy I'll give is, clinical trials. We talk about clinical trials all the time. We know how important they are. We know how to do clinical trials the old way. We will forever, probably, until we solve all our problems, be doing trials in a similar paradigm for how we think about bringing in those kinds of data. This is a new paradigm for bringing in data in a different way. And it will be just as powerful, if not more, once it is scaled and implemented as what we've all seen from clinical trials.
So it sounds like you're excited to be her mentor and be part of this.
Just a little bit.
Wow.
She's great. We've been working together since November, and we've already. We're not a new partnership. We've been working together since November. So, like I said, I can today in the lecture, I can already give on her behalf a progress report on what's been accomplished since November.
Wow, I can't wait to hear that and what you guys do in the future.
It's exciting.
And I'd like to finish up to talk about something, your own personal experience with cancer. You were diagnosed a few years ago with breast cancer. So first, tell us how you're doing and how that has sort of changed you as a leader and a doctor.
Yeah, I'm doing very, very well. I got, it was only 6 weeks into being the new director of the National Cancer Institute. I went in to get my annual mammogram and got the nasty result that 300,000 women get across the United States every year. Not every day. Every year. I had breast cancer. And I went through what many, many thousands of women do, which is, the uncertainty, didn't know what I was facing, needed to finish a workup. So fortunate to have clinicians, doctors, and nurses who cared for me, took me through what needed to happen with my care. And now I'm trying to run the National Cancer Institute at the same time, so I'm back and forth. But that team assessed what my situation was. We developed a plan of care. They took me through all of it seamlessly. And here now, 3 years later, I am absolutely fine. And my outlook is great, really great. And the thing, I get asked this question a lot. And what I have to tell you, I am the most grateful for are the many, many, many thousands of women who went before me, who participated in clinical trials that allowed those scientists. Yes, I'm grateful for the science. Yes, I'm grateful for the medicines. But I am truly, truly grateful for the women who agreed to test those things, to bring the evidence that said, yes, this is the right thing to do, and yes, you will be safe. And those are my real heroes.
Wow. Has it changed your outlook in terms of what you want to do in life or your career or anything like that?
I get asked that a lot too, and it always makes the answer is not really. Okay, so remember, I told you one of my very, very early influences in life was when my beloved grandmother got cancer. So from early childhood, I understood the reality of a cancer diagnosis, and I understood it could happen to any of us, and it could happen to me. So I hope I always tried to also practice as a doctor, as someone for my patients, where, I'm as concerned about you as I would be about myself or my family member. And so when I went through the journey myself, I was grateful that it all went so well. But, no, I think I'd kind of always carried from childhood that thought that, yep, we're all in this, including me.
It was hard to be even more committed and passionate than you already were.
some people get a cancer diagnosis, they just never thought about it. And, they are transformed by a cancer diagnosis. And I will also say the other reason, let's be clear, that I was not radically transformed by a cancer diagnosis is I was so darn lucky. I did not have to have so much of the really horrible trauma that our patients see every day. I'm the luckiest. And so
and that might be due to research and clinical trials.
Exactly, research and clinical trials. So I also do not want to, cannot say that my story reflects the experience of cancer patients. My story reflects the experience of a very, very lucky cancer patient and cancer survivor. There are those out there who are not nearly as lucky.
Well, I'm glad you were lucky, and I'm glad we were lucky to have you here to give the block lectureship. And I hope you'll be back to visit James over the next few years.
Oh, I'm sure I will.
Okay. Well, you have a home away from home here.
All right. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by the Ohio State University Comprehensive Cancer Center, Arthur G. James Cancer Hospital, and Richard J. Solove Research Institute. For more information, check out our website, cancer.osu.edu.